I'm sure that there are people that try to engage in that conduct. What you have to try to do as an attorney and as a judge is to try to see through, you know, try to figure out which side really is being honest with you, telling you the truth, and whether or not someone such as a tenant who brings up a defense of a defective, let's say, pipe or something like that, whether or not they somehow cause that pipe to, you know, meet with an unfortunate accident, so to speak.
Yes.
And usually that can be rebutted by the landlord might come in and say, look, I had that, you know, system repaired not just a month ago. It was serviced. Here's the bill and the contract showing the repairs that were made to that. It's impossible that could have just, you know, broken on its own. And then very seldom do you actually have an eyewitness that said, I saw Joe so-and-so take a wrench to that pipe. But usually the inference, judges are pretty adept most of the time at drawing inferences of who's telling the truth and who's not. So does that conduct occur? Yes, but you know what? In a lot of occasions, there are unfortunately some very, you know, bad landlords that do not maintain their premises, and you know, and we see it quite a bit. You know, many times where people lose running water, they lose heat during the winter months, and as Jackie stated, that's a legitimate reason for withholding rent. So does it happen? Yes, but I'd like to think that I think most of the times, at least the people that we see, most of those people are fairly legitimate, and they come in and they do have legitimate gripes about why they're withholding rent if they are doing that.
To add to what Lenny was saying, I don't want people out there to think that we're all landlord tonight. Tenants do have rights.
Of course,
yes. Certainly if there is an apartment they're renting that is not up to code, that is not taken care of because you have an absentee landlord, there are certain, there's recourse. First and foremost is you can call your local housing office. Every city or town has a housing office. You call your local housing office, they immediately send out a housing inspector. I think by law they have to send a housing inspector out to that house within a certain amount of time.
Yes.
If the housing inspector finds violations, and inevitably they do, especially if it's an absentee landlord, they have to write up a report, it's a little report, and it says these are the violations, this is the code that you're not in compliance with, you need to fix this, you need to fix that, you need to fix this, you need to fix that. And in fact, if you don't fix this and that, you could be penalized. There may be criminal penalties as well.
That's true.
Now, the interesting thing in Massachusetts is if a housing officer, housing inspector goes out to your home and they gave the landlord a list of violations, the landlord is prohibited by law from evicting that tenant for 6 months. If they try to evict within that 6 months, it's deemed a retaliatory eviction, and the tenant does have a right to collect damages.
Yeah.
Compensation for the tenant.
Exactly. Exactly.
There is a presumption. There is that presumption also in Rhode Island, just so everyone is clear, that if there is, if it's within a 6-month period of time that these violations occur, and then the landlord tries to evict within that period of time, although the presumption is rebuttable, it's very hard to get around that. It just is. So.
Now, some people, as I said, rent month to month. Other people have leases with a contract, and it probably lists there. I know I've seen them. Lists. This is considered to be in good condition. If someone's renting month to month, they may not know what is considered to be in good condition, acceptable circumstances. So you're saying that the Department of Housing would be one that could, if not mediate that, at least let them know what is a legitimate complaint as opposed to, you know, I really do need to paint those stairs.
And not only that, but a lot of leases are verbal. You don't even have, many times I have people that come in and say, well, I'm paying the landlord X number of dollars a month, and they don't have a written lease. It's a verbal agreement. So in essence, the condition,
tenancy at will.
Right, exactly, tenancy at will, and you take the condition of the premises as you find it. However, it does have to be habitable. So if in fact it's not up to code, or it's an illegal apartment, or something of that nature, that's when you'd want to call the housing authority for that municipality, go in and have them inspect to see if there's in fact a problem. Many times, however, tenants are a little reluctant to do that, especially if they have a reasonable rent. They don't want to make waves sometimes with the landlords, and they live with these problems, which is not ideal, but I can understand it.
Now, I know we don't have much time left, but another question. If the tenant has been paying his or her rent faithfully, but the landlord has not been paying his mortgage. Now what happens? Does the tenant have any recourse, or is he or she out on the street because there's a foreclosure because the tenant, the landlord was not taking care of business?
My opinion on that is until the tenant receives a notice from a mortgage company or a new property owner that there is a new property owner, they need to just continue to pay their rent to their landlord as in accordance with their contract. And this is happening a lot because, especially in Providence, where numerous foreclosures, tenants are paying their landlords nowhere to be found. Next thing you know, there's a foreclosure company or an auctioneer pitching a flag on their front lawn saying, the house is sold, you got to be out within a certain amount of time, which, by the way, they don't have to be out. But
is that true?
They don't have to be out until they're legally evicted.
That's right.
by the new owners. And that means they get served with a notice of eviction, and they get served. They are told that they need to be in court, and they do not have to be out until a judge tells them to be out. But they should continue to pay their rent in accordance with their lease. That's my advice. Until they get notice that there's a new owner, they need to continue to pay their rent.
And if they don't know whether the landlord is, because many times they'll say, well, the landlord, my letter came back, or my check was never cashed. They should at least put the money aside into an escrow account, into a bank account, so that when the rent does become due, they can just pay it and catch up, and explain to the judge that they did make attempts to try to pay, but they were unsuccessful.
You are lawyers. You handle these kinds of things. I also hear that there are eviction lawyers specifically. I imagine that means that that's their specialty. Does someone really need to have a lawyer in the first place, and do they need to have an eviction lawyer as a specialist in the second place?
Well, my response to that is going to be that, as I state in workers' comp and in most areas of the law, you should have an attorney. The law does have its twists and turns. Some areas of law are more complicated than others. There's a reason why lawyers are out there, because, let's face it, the law is complex. There are things with the court system that are, sometimes quirky, that people are not necessarily familiar with. So, my feeling is you're always better off to have a lawyer. However, that does not necessarily mean that in every situation you need to have it. To address your question as far as eviction lawyers, well, you probably, if you're not a savvy person that's gone through the court system before and have experience with it, my strong advice would be that you should have a lawyer representing you, whether you're the tenant or you're the landlord.
Do you need to ask the lawyer up front, have you ever handled this before, or is it just such a basic routine thing? That
I think it's always a smart thing to find out
ask.
if your lawyer has experience in the area that you're paying him or her for.
Right, absolutely.
Again, there are so many other issues that I wish we could discuss about the disputes between landlords and tenants. However, at the moment, we wanted to say thank you to Jackie Grasso and to Lenny Cordeiro from the law firm Audette, Bazaar, Cordeiro and Grasso in East Providence, and we hope you will continue to stay tuned. And if you do have questions, Bazaar, B-A-Z-A-R, at abcglawfirm.com. In the upcoming segments, we're going to be talking about family court, and in particular, the issues of divorce. Rhode Island and in Massachusetts, and we're hoping that you'll be paying attention, staying in touch with us. Join us. Our discussion of legal matters continues.